everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, the show that is brought to you by the letters T and V. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And it's that time. We are going to talk about Brian's favorite subject, because there's going to be very heavy Muppet content when we talk about Sesame Street.
Well, obviously, it's like another branch of the same Muppet family. Obviously, like whenever we talk about, Brian talks about Muppets, I typically talk more about the Muppet Show side of it. But I am definitely also forever a Sesame Street fan as well.
We're going to talk about a show that is near and dear to all of our childhood. Like, you might not have ever watched any episodes of it. I know you did, Brian. I'm just our metaphorical viewer. You might have not listened to any episodes, seen anything of it, but you've seen merchandise, you've seen ads, you've seen them pop up. Maybe you've been to SeaWorld where they have a partnership with Sesame Street stuff there. You've been exposed to Sesame Street in some way or fashion because it is a 55-year-old TV show, and it was very vital in the formation of children's entertainment. You can't point to children's entertainment without it.
Yeah, it changed children's entertainment unquestionably. When you think of children's TV, even if Sesame Street's not your thing, that's something you think about. And you say, you go to the kids section of stores, like how many baby onesies have Elmo or Big Bird or Cookie Monster on them? And you said the merchandising rights. Like I read Jim Henson's biography a couple of years ago. You can imagine the amount of money he made on Sesame Street merchandise rights was insane.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just for my family.
I know it's not like in the same tier as like Star Wars toys or cars or like anything, but still, it's been so pervasive for 55 years. And there were times like the Tickle Me Elmo doll where that was the hot ticket item that so many people bought. And so,
and that was around the time. I mean, the star of Sesame Street, like the number one star, was Big Bird up until like the 90s, and then it changed to Elmo, and now it's kind of interchangeable. I'm still in the Big Bird camp myself, even though I can't deny that throughout the 90s they had a bunch of specials that were mediocre. There's Elmo Saves Christmas, Cinder Elmo, The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland, Elmo Palooza. That one was actually a little bit okay because of Jon Stewart, not because of Elmo.
Yeah. I mean, Robert California says so much of like, God help the Elmo generation.
Exactly. Which, I mean, technically we are the Elmo generation because we were little in the 90s, but I saw enough of the old school stuff to be that, okay, I'm sounding hipster now, but I don't care. Big Bird is the star of Sesame Street in my eyes.
No worries. So that's why we had to talk about this TV show, because when we're doing this sort of episode, if you saw the title of it, you know that we're talking about like the most influential TV shows in history. So we've had a couple of these. Yeah. We talked about Saturday Night Live, which, by the way, in researching Sesame Street, it feels like it's a kid version of Saturday Night Live. Like some of the same creative juices flow in that regard, but it's just a lot more kid-friendly, obviously.
Yeah, and a lot more went into it. Yeah, well, absolutely. And we also talked about the most influential with The Daily Show.
Yep.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, see if anything else comes to mind. I think the only show that would be in contention for most influential kid show with Sesame Street might be Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Can you think of anything else that's on that level?
And I definitely wanted to bring up Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did debut in 1968, and Sesame Street debuted in 1969. We'll talk a little bit more about that history in a moment, but that was one comparison that I definitely wanted to make, because when Sesame Street was conceived, it was conceived in 66. So it's not like they were drawing off of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but when both of those shows come out at the same time, it was a really good complement piece to each other, because Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did a lot of, and Sesame Street did stuff like this too, but Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was a lot of emotional intelligence, and it was kind of like having a babysitter in your room, like a close family friend babysitter. Whereas Sesame Street is a little bit more like a teacher and you're in class with some of your friends. So you're learning with your friends while you're also seeing some of these skits and this fun stuff that they do. So I think that they went together well, but they didn't compete in maybe the way we might think they would.
No, because I grew up watching both, and it's interesting that they both succeed because one of the pivots they made with Sesame Street was originally on like the street set, it was just going to be the adults, and
Yeah.
all the Muppet stuff was going to be separate. And then that people weren't watching that. They showed some test focus groups, and the kids were tuning out whenever it was that part of it. But then Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, unless they went to the puppet segments, was really just Mr. Rogers in his house talking to the camera, which sounds on paper like that would bore kids. But I mean, I can estimate for me, I watched it and I was interested in it.
Yeah, and I'm in that same camp with Sesame Street, because I remember when I'd watch Sesame Street, when I'd see stuff with the live actors, I'd be like, when the Muppets going to show back up? I would be always excited for it. And so, yeah, these kids, because they did have kind of a test focus group that they did of these houses in Philadelphia, speaking of which, and they like showed it for just like these 60 families or 60 houses or something like that. It wasn't a huge amount, but they showed like 4 or 5 episodes to them, and they got their reviews. And that was exactly it. They lit up when any of these Muppet characters were on the screen. And yet when they took them away, the kids would be like, why, when do we get back to those? And the idea was these psychologists were like, listen, the kids are going to get confused if you have Muppets and humans interacting on the streets together. We don't want to confuse them about the world is like. And actually, the producer of the show, John, what's his last name?
John Stone. Yep.
John Stone. He was actually siding with them, and he was overruled. And later he's like, thank God I listened.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, I mean, so, well, before we get to that, that's why, Carol Spinney was listed. I think the credits, he wasn't listed with the Muppet Performers. He was listed among the cast, because that was his role, was to be his 2 characters are the 2 that are most easily integrated in with the humans, which is Big Bird, who's full body. You can show him. They can show the whole head to toe, and then Oscar, who he's crouched coming out of the trash can. Both of those were designed to be able to interact. And initially, the conceit was going to be that those 2 were the main characters that would interact with the adults, and then of course it spilled into more and more characters very quickly, which I think was a good call. But it's such an interesting call because it seems so normal now, because we Sesame Street was on the air long before either of us were born, but at the time it was groundbreaking and new.
Yeah, because they saw the effect of television on kids, especially the ones that were preschool, that weren't in school quite yet. And this was still new enough that people didn't know how to take full advantage of it. I mean, you and I, if you're a millennial, especially an elder millennial, you remember the early days of internet when companies didn't quite know how to use the internet. So you'd have Pepsi and be like, here's our webpage. It has our Pepsi logo, and you can maybe contact us, and here's an address to write us a letter, but that's all you do on the page. We don't know what to do with a web page. So there's so many people that were like, what do we do with this television? But then, who's this Cooney? I have the name.
Joan Gans Cooney. Who was kind of referred to as like the mother of Sesame Street. It was her. Yeah, she's kind of like the spirit of it. And as of recording this, she's still alive in her 90s.
Yeah. Wow. Good for her.
Yeah.
But yeah, she had that idea, and she was like, how can I do something for kids? Because she saw kids would watch 27 hours of TV per week back in the 60s.
Yeah.
This isn't like modern day where that number might be higher. So like 27 hours, how do we fill that time? How can we have something aimed for them that doesn't talk down to the kids? Because that's what the kids programs were, is like kind of silly, stupid stuff that were like, let's also try and sell you things while we're talking down to you. Hey, kids, go tell your dads that you want Tootsie Rolls, was the one I remember seeing from a documentary that we watched.
Yeah. Which some of this information I'll just shout out. We watched, it's on currently on Amazon Prime. It's called Street Gang: How We Get to Sesame Street. And it just shows front to back, like how the show came to be. So that we'll be pulling stuff from there. And if you're interested in this topic, I definitely recommend going to watch that. But yeah, from the very beginning, it was, why don't we take, the combination of education and entertainment and seeing, is this possible?
Yeah. So in 66, she starts trying to shop this programming, and she's like, let's do something. And she wanted it to be a big thing. So she was actually asking for a good amount of money. She was asking for millions of dollars back in the 60s for kids programming. on public access stations, on the WKRP channels that would have to have the antenna that you could barely get, and if you didn't get it, oh well, we'll go to the other stuff that we get a more secure connection. And so she was asking, because it would cost, like, even back then, something like $23,000 per episode. 28,000, I see it. 28,000.
Way more than that now, but yeah,
in the
back then,
yeah, in the 60s. And the idea was, we want this to actually compete with bigger scale programming, stuff for adults. And like, I don't know if we'll ever hit the Nielsen ratings, but we want it to be in competition with those shows, but only in like the slot that kids are going to watch the TV. So they put a bunch of money into it, and they're saying, we need to find someone who would do this. So that's why it took a little bit. And eventually the support came from the federal government, who they were able to petition them and say, this is going to be for education of kids nationwide, and especially even for those that are going to be in these lower income areas, which is why, and you can talk a little bit. I almost called you Joe, because that's your name that you have on there.
Well, yeah, because I think first it was Lloyd Morissette. So I tried to get a list, like a short list of names that are like important to Sesame Street becoming real. So we're going to make sure we hit them. So we got Joan Gans Cooney, Lloyd Morissette. I think he was the producer on the network who really paired with her. She gave him credit for really being one of the spearheads of Sesame Street as well. And then they wanted to, and then eventually they brought in Jim Henson. Yeah. If you think about. At this point, this was before Muppet Show, before Sesame Street. He had done the Jimmy Dean Show and Sam and Friends early on, and he was really well known for his commercials, and he would do sketches on like Ed Sullivan Show. He was kind of like the hip, cool guy in that field, and he had never really done children's television stuff that was for kids. But still, I mean, you can't imagine Sesame Street without the influence of Jim Henson's Muppets.
Yeah, and before Jim Henson came along, puppetry was like the Howdy Doody show. Or I don't know if this is very niche, what I'm about to say, but there's like someone I knew who they had these old albums and records of like evangelists, children's evangelists that would use puppets, and then they would record themselves like back in the 50s. So they'd record the ventriloquism act with these puppets of how they were trying to use that for education for kids. But it was still schlocky. It was this wooden doll that they'd pull out of a case. And, we've seen even still today that sort of ventriloquism exists, but Jim Henson did something completely different, where the actor who was the puppeteer was intended to completely disappear from view, and that the puppet that they had was the character. And they had major success in doing that, to the point that Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, Big Bird, all of these puppets, all these Muppets are real characters to us. We don't even look at it and say, hey, there's Miss Piggy, aka Frank Oz. We look, that's Miss Piggy, that is her character type, etc.
One of my favorite things that Sesame Street did, more so early on, and it was usually either Kermit or Grover. I think they did it with other characters, but a lot of times it was Kermit or Grover, and they would have these unscripted conversations with these like 3 or 4 year old little kids, and just see what the kids do. And it's amazing, like they're not hiding from the kid that there's a performer. Like Frank Oz is underneath Grover, doing Grover, and yet the kid it completely ignores the guy with the mustache down below. It's just they're looking at the blue puppet right there, and that just shows the level of skill to the performance too. Like you can completely make yourself disappear by making this puppet come alive.
It is really fun to hear how similar, like going back to this in the documentary and hearing the voices and be like, okay, I hear Grover, but at the same time, I hear Fozzie Bear. Or I hear Kermit, but I very much also hear Ernie. And
so a lot of those voices are very similar.
Yeah.
And most of the Muppet Show guys, I mean, I think really only Dave Goelz was not a Sesame Street guy. Otherwise, all those performers from the Muppet Show also did Sesame Street. And I think that Jim Henson and Frank Oz would like block shoot a bunch of Bert and Ernie sketches so they could slide them into other episodes, because they had their own careers and stuff.
Yeah.
Which is why another reason why Carol Spinney was like on set permanently a Sesame Street guy.
Yeah, Jim and Frank and their back and forth, like Bert and Ernie are such a great pairing. And, we've used that pairing before, like Paul Simon, when he wrote The Odd Couple, like there's the one uptight guy, and then there's the one more loosey-goosey. Like we've seen these connected before, but just the comedic duo of Jim Henson and Frank Oz created characters that were elevated beyond just kids programming, that they have some really funny stuff. And so being able to watch those guys and see some of the outtakes and bloopers as well is just tremendous.
Yeah, it was a little sad when they showed a clip of Jim Henson saying like, "Oh yeah, I imagine me and Frank when we're 90 sitting on our rocking chairs doing Bert and Ernie," and I think that if Jim Henson were still alive, I think that Frank Oz and Jim Henson would still be. They might still have retired. I think Frank Oz would have still retired from being a performer, but I think he still would have done some Bert and Ernie sketches with Jim Henson.
Yeah, Jim Henson today would have been around 88 or 87, something like that.
Yeah, and Frank Oz is in his early 80s as well. So they're obviously we're talking about a show that's 55 years old. So of course everyone around then is going to be much older now. Just that's how time works.
100%. So let's real quick back up because we're talking about inner city kids and talking about the decision to create Sesame Street on a street in a ghetto borough of New York City. Brian, I think you have a little more information on that than I would, so why don't you take that?
Yeah, so it was initially intended, like, yes, the prime audience was any kind of younger kids, especially the ones stuck at home watching TV, but they really wanted to reach the inner city kids, and especially the diverse kids. They didn't say it, but I mean, it was made for inner city Black kids. And at one point, Joan Gans Cooney was saying, like, if we're not reaching these kids, then like, is this even worth it to do?
Yeah, and one thing when I was looking into this too, like, I there's a little of a cynicism in me, and so like you'll see some people like how they rewrite history where people are like, oh no, I've always been this way. And so like looking into this, I'm like, so this documentary they did about Sesame Street and these interviews I've seen the last 10 years from Mary Gans Cooney, and she's talking about how like from the beginning she wanted to be inclusive. I'm like, was she really, or did it just, that's just kind of how it naturally shaped out? And as I was looking at it, it did really seem like that was from the very beginning, from the outset, that was a huge intention of what they were doing. So it wasn't just like it just happened to get like that in a response to whatever. Because this came out in the 1969, which that was the year of Woodstock. That was the year of civil rights marches. And 70s was really the Civil War, or not civil, the Vietnam War. The civil rights continued. A lot of big things in our country that were divisive. This wasn't a reaction to that. This was very intentional, saying, hey, we need to make sure we're being inclusive. We need to appeal to these kids. And like the adult cast, there was originally the original cast. There was Mr. Hooper, Bob, Gordon, and Susan. And you probably didn't realize the Gordon that we all think of is actually was replaced. There was a different Gordon originally. His name was played by Matt Robinson, and he, I think, was the first one you see on the show. It's Gordon was walking with this little girl and showing her around Sesame Street, and he introduces her to Big Bird and everything. And you see in clips from back in the 60s, there was a show, there was a station in, I wrote this down. Mississippi?
Yes. That refused to show. I think it was Jackson, Mississippi. I forget I forget the actual city that didn't play it, and I think that was cited as being because of too many Black performers. And it's crazy to think like that's just like one generation back. Like it wasn't in our lifetimes, but it's in our parents' lifetimes.
Yeah, and it's really. It's kind of funny, even when you look at it too, like if you jump forward by maybe 10 years to the end of the 70s, there was pushback from the Hispanic population of saying this show, Sesame Street, is racist, quote unquote, because it doesn't have enough Hispanic performers and their bilingual sections aren't very well done. And so they're like, well, we're not trying to do that. So they hired Hispanic performers then as well. And so it's like, are you calling Sesame Street racist? Because, like, come on, of all the shows that are out at that time.
Well, they had Maria and then Luis. I mean, I think they were even the early 70s in there and added on there. And that was another thing there is, so the guy, Emilio Delgado, who has since passed away, he played Luis on Sesame Street. He said, and I've seen interviews with him saying that before Sesame Street, the roles he was being put up for and offered for were like criminals, gang members. That's what he was seen as a Mexican man, and that's what really drew him to Sesame Street. It's like he gets to go on this show, and be just a regular American who has a business and teaches kids Spanish and doesn't have to be a gang member or a criminal just because he's Hispanic.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
with this diversity, going back to the station that showed it, they showed a clip, and a reporter asked this, or the producer or director, whoever of the station, saying like, does it have anything to do with the diversity? Is that why you didn't show it? And he's like, that is a very difficult question. It's like, no, it's a yes or no. It either had something to do with it or it didn't.
That's a bad response until he follows it up with like, if the people like it, they'll tell me, and if the people don't like it, I'm like, oh, so you are just like, if I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, which he probably doesn't deserve, that he's just like, I know my state is full of racists, so I can't really take a position on this. But I'm sure he himself was one of the aforementioned racists, so I can't really give him too much of a benefit of the doubt. But like,
I love the quote the clip they showed of Joan Gans Cooney saying like, well, if being diverse, if that's our worst sin, then I'm happy to be a sinner. Like that's a good quote.
Yeah.
Because I mean, from the very start, it was created for. I mean, it wasn't created exclusively for Black kids, but that was like the target they really wanted to get from the get go. It was inclusive from. It was never not inclusive.
Yeah, because there was, for the socioeconomic politics of kids in those communities, they were at a disadvantage of kids in more middle class communities. That there was a higher rate of dropouts by the time they got to high school. They were more at I already said disadvantage, but like they were behind, so to speak, once they started. And the idea was, let's bring education into our programming so that all these kids that weren't on the same foot can now be on equal footing and have as good of a start as other kids maybe have in their communities because they can afford a little bit better or nicer things.
And while we're on the subject of diversity, so Matt, I'm guessing before this documentary, had you even heard of the character Roosevelt Franklin?
I had heard, I knew that the character, this is going to be funny, the character from Arrested Development, the Franklin puppet, was a spoof off of a
I can see that
sort of things. In fact, even to the point that his character has the "It Ain't Easy Being White" or "Easy Being Brown" like that song, kind of mimicking Kermit's "It Ain't Easy Being Green" song.
So this character, Roosevelt Franklin, was created by Matt Robinson, who was the original Gordon. Created him initially to give a voice to like the Black kids, so that they could see someone who was like them. So he was designed to have like the culture and how he spoke. I'm not going to do an impression because that would be wildly racist. But you can look up clips, or if you see this documentary. But then
you can also, as bad as it is, you can look up Michael Scott doing the Chris Rock impersonation, and he like speaks like just as like that same timbre. Yeah.
Yes, but I will say Roosevelt Franklin was performed and created by a Black man, so it wasn't
exactly.
But then it got the opposite effect, and a lot of the Black audience thought that it was being racist and putting them in a pigeonhole, as in like this is how everyone speaks, and they didn't like that. So it kind of backfired on him, and then they eventually just kind of phased the character out. And then that led to him eventually leaving the show. And then they didn't talk about it. There was a second Gordon for a couple years, and then we got Roscoe Orman, who became the Gordon that we all know.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that we need to remember when we talk about equal rights stuff, when we talk about racism and things like that, is that, you know, you're not going to have one Black person who can speak for all Black people, just like you can't ever have one white person who speaks for all white people. So it's like when I would have my movie podcast with Terrence, we talk about like some characters, and this is a pretty common thing, so it's not like I'm inventing this phrase, but we talk about like there's this Black swagger that some of these characters have that are Black, that they bring this great confidence and this big, larger than life energy, and people are drawn to that because people have always been attracted to confidence. And so that's why, like, there's jokes like in The Office where Dwight is like, in order to get people to like start doing something, you get the black people to do it first, and then you get the white people, and then once they're in, you get the black people to stop doing it. And it's like the start of that is that there's something so attractive about this larger than life personality of someone who really understands who they are, but done in this puppet form at that time when people maybe weren't as ready for it. I can see why black parents weren't as comfortable with having that type of representation of their culture on screen.
Yeah, and it's definitely not something that you and I can speak to firsthand. But
Yeah,
I thought it was an interesting character. I will say that from the little clips that I've seen that he was phased out before we were born. It was
yeah.
is what it was.
And we've talked a lot about like these early days too, and I kind of miss jumping into something that I wanted to bring up too, and
Sure.
this whole idea about edutainment, because I really enjoy that thought that and edutainment has been around for years. It's been around for centuries actually. It's so based on how you want to define it. So if you look at like songs that conveyed or like using songs to convey information, we've had that since like ancient Greece. We've had that since theater, the invention of theater. If
Hmm.
you want to look at things like, there's some like Ben Franklin, he actually developed some sort of edutainment pamphlets that he would have for his community, and he distributed those. But really the person who pushed that term edutainment and where that really came from was Walt Disney himself in the 50s when he was describing the True Life Adventures series that he was working on. And
Hmm.
so Walt, like it makes sense why the Muppets are a part of Disney culture too, because it does just fall in line with things that have been done by these people who are futurists, and they've been looking to how do we educate people while also bringing them something that's entertaining. We're going to talk a little bit more about edutainment now
Yeah.
and what we've seen a little bit, because we're going to go into how this show has affected our culture,
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
that.
But even with that, I love one thing they said. Like, yeah, it can be like it was educational most of the time. Every now and then, you can have a scene that's just silly for the sake of silliness. At one point, someone said in the documentary they were talking, "What are we teaching in this? What's the lesson in this scene? Like happiness." And I think one of my favorite, I don't know if it's obscure, super obscure, but one of my favorite Sesame Street characters is the two-headed monster.
Yeah.
And that is performed. It was Jerry Nelson, Richard Hunt performed them, and I think that is the Sesame Street equivalent of the Swedish Chef. Basically, just meant to goof around, have fun, speak in gibberish language. Takes two performers to perform them, but it was always just them arguing. Like the one they showed was the letter P, and then they add the little thing R, like P R. And like they you can kind of just speak every little word, but they speak in gibberish, and that is just what it's just they can maybe loosely teach something, but that's a character like you can teach something, but every now and then just put that character on screen to keep kids' attention and to just be silly for a minute too. So I love
Yeah.
that they can do both.
Exactly, because there is fun to be had, and like especially in the comedic styles of a number of these writers, and
Yeah.
to spoof something that like monster piece theater and mocking the masterpiece theater, and to have these jokes even for parents. And I'm always going to appreciate when a TV show that's for kids can appeal to parents as well, and to have
Yeah.
things for them. And so there was a little bit of, I don't know if irreverence is the right word, because they still were kind on the streets. One of their intentions when they said it in the inner city is that they're like, there's also some negative things that come with that, but we're not going to focus on that. We're not going to make things worse than they need to be. We're
Yeah.
going to just accurately represent this and have it be a fun area, and all the positive parts of growing up in that sort of
Oh,
area.
absolutely. And also like from this is from Jim Henson's biography, but I guess they had a code word. If someone yelled "blue sky," it meant there are kids on set. Watch your language.
Makes sense.
So I wanted to touch on. We've mentioned most of these before, but I said some of the big names of Sesame Street. We talked about Joan Gans Cooney, Lloyd Morissette, John Stone, who was basically like almost like the showrunner of Sesame Street. He was, like the Bill Lawrence or the Greg Daniels for some of Sesame Street, and
Wouldn't
really. Yeah.
would he be like that Lorne Michaels role where he's just so ingrained? Because that's what I was kind of taking away in
Yeah.
looking into him, is that he seemed like he was kind of that guy, and that Jim Henson was a lot of the talent and a
Yeah.
lot of the like the right hand man to make John's dreams like really come to life.
Yeah, people think of Jim Henson as the helm of the ship. Jim Henson was much more like in charge of like the Muppet Show. But at Sesame Street, like, he was in charge of like the Muppet piece of it. But but John Stone was like the guy in charge of taking all like the lesson, the curriculum, working with Jim Henson and putting everything together. I mean, there wouldn't have been Sesame Street as we knew it without John Stone. And so that's why I wanted to bring him up, because he's one of these names that we don't talk about very often.
Yeah.
And then we obviously Jim Henson and Joe Raposo, who's my name, who wrote so many of the songs. He wrote "It's Not Easy Being Green," "Rubber Ducky," "See It's for Cookie." A lot of these, like the big name songs, are from Joe Raposo.
And when Brian says he's my name, Brian
Oh yeah,
and
I
I
should
will
clarify
always,
what that means.
when we go into this recording session, you know, we're not in the same room, and so we have like, this is our name, and so we always pick like a reference to it instead of just Matt and Brian. It's always a reference just to kind of have our own little inside joke.
Yeah, just for us. So yeah, sometimes I have to think about, the listening audience, I hope, can't see us.
Like, wait, I thought your name was Brian.
And then Matt Robinson, and then obviously Carol Spinney, very instrumental as Big Bird, Not So Grouch. Of course, I could go on listing names, but those are the main ones that I thought that you can't not talk about when you're talking about like creating Sesame Street.
Yeah, especially creating it. And I know that because we talked a little bit on this, but there was just a huge shift in the culture when Kevin Clash came on as Elmo. And the focus of Sesame Street shifted a bit, and it to me, like, as I watch these old clips and I watch a little bit of like what I remember as a kid, it felt almost a little bit of a dumbing down when Elmo came in. I don't know if you feel that.
I think so too. I mean, Elmo, it wasn't like, oh, Elmo's on screen, now he's the best. He started as a background character and eventually became a supporting character. And then I think it was like the early 90s. But from then on, it was like Elmo Mania. And I was not a fan of Elmo's World as a segment. Do you remember that?
No. Yeah, I remember Elmo's World. I don't remember any specifics out of it. I just remember it existing.
It was like we went into Elmo having his own like third of the show where it was like everything was animated, like cartoony, except for Elmo. And then you had Mr. Noodle, which was this clown guy, and it'd be like, "Hey, put on your hat," and the guy's like holding a hat. What? He's putting it on his feet. Like you hear your kid's voices, "No, not your feet," and he puts it on his. It's like that kind of humor, which I think is already. Sesame Street is for younger kids, and I'm sure there's an audience for that. But I don't know. I just think I would rather have them on the street, talking with, you know, Maria and Gordon and Bob and Big Bird, and then having a whole third of the show just be Elmo with his goldfish doing these sketches. I don't know. Like that. I like Elmo as a supporting character. I don't like Elmo as the character.
And it doesn't help then the problems that Kevin Clash had in his personal life and the allegations against him. And we're not going to go much into that. You can look into that yourself. But it definitely leaves this bad taste in the mouth of Sesame Street. And I think there's just like kind of these three eras of Sesame Street, that the pre-Elmo era is a lot of really good stuff, even with the death of Jim Henson and the death of Mr. Cooper. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. But even after that there still is good in the show. And then there's Elmo, and it just feels like it's a drastic difference. And then now I'll see some of these episodes of Sesame Street. I don't watch like too deeply into it, but it feels, I don't know, it just feels like it's missing what originally made it great. And it's a little less to me like educational and a little bit more of, I don't know the best way to put it. It's still appealing to that like the lowest common denominator. It's talking down, I feel like, you know?
I feel like it jumps up and down. I think there are times it still hits from what I can see, but I agree. I watch it now and not the best. But also, you realize all those names that I listed, all Joan Gans Cooney is the only one of those names who is still alive. And I don't know how actively involved she is in the show now. I would imagine not as much, being as old as she is. So it's like that's going to happen over time. Like all of those people that made that early year of Sesame Street what it is, most of them are no longer with us, and the ones that aren't actively involved in the show anymore.
Yeah,
it was a huge part of it as well.
I agree. And so, like when we go back and we're looking at like what are like the milestone moments in Sesame Street, like you see someone's like an episode that won it an Emmy, and I already just mentioned it, that the actor who played Mr. Hooper died. What was his name? Will Lee.
Will Lee. Yep.
Okay, yeah, Will Lee. When he died, there was a little bit of an internal discussion of what do we do about this character? Do we recast them? How do we like move forward? And of course, it's going to be fresh for all of them as well, because they all loved Will and they enjoyed working with him. But one of their thoughts was, no, this is a learning opportunity. This is a way to talk about something that affects all of us. We all are going to, at some point, experience death for ourselves and also for people that we love at certain points. And sometimes it's earlier than it honestly should be. And so they're like, how can we talk about it? So they gather these psychiatrists, they gather religious leaders, grief counselors, and they kind of have this little panel discussion with them. And they're like, okay, what are some of the things that we need to walk away with? What are things that we can teach the kids about death? And the way that they went about having that episode is by having it be Big Bird asking those questions and Big Bird processing Mr. Hooper's death for himself.
Exactly. And it was just Big Bird and the adults. And it was, Big Bird says, oh, he had painted pictures of all the adults, and he gives around to them. They're like, oh, this is cool. It looks just like me. And at the end, it gets to Mr. Hooper, and he's like, oh my gosh, that's so great. It looks just like Mr. Hooper. And then he's like, oh, I'll give it to him when he comes back. And then you can see, this is the only part that I think was acting, was their surprise at that statement. And then they all have to explain to him, he died. He doesn't get to come back. And they explain, like, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad, but just we're here for you. That's how it's going to be. And it's hard because, like you said, all those tears are real.
Yeah. And even the little, like, why does it have to be this way? Well, Big Bird, that's just how it is. That's how it has to be. Is that when someone goes away because of death, they don't come back. And it was a nice, calm and gentle way to say that to kids. And they also intentionally chose to air it on Thanksgiving so that the parents could watch the show with the kids. And they announced it ahead of time. They're saying, hey, this is going to be the episode Mr. Hooper dies. Watch it with your kids. Help them walk through this. And then they're going to have questions for you.
Yeah, and interesting thing now looking back is, if you include Carol Spinney, 5 of the people in that scene have since passed away themselves.
Yeah. So, I mean, it happens, obviously. It's a 55-year show. 55 years is a long amount of time. People die. Jim Henson died at 53. So, I mean, you might not make it past that, sadly.
And another one that...
threat to anyone listening. You, specifically. You know who I'm talking about.
And another one that doesn't get talked about a lot, which is actually kind of deep, is Mr. Snuffleupagus. So originally, the whole deal was he was never imaginary, but the whole thing was like he would wander away before like the adult characters would see him, and so they all believed he was imaginary. They didn't. Oh, it was like a running gag, like, oh, Big Bird, you and your Mr. Snuffleupagus, and he'd be wandering in the background, like they just missed him. I guess the decision to make him visible to everybody, to break that gag, was they wanted to not have the message that adults won't believe you if believe kids, and they wanted to, specifically if kids were being abused or hurt, they didn't want to send the message, oh, don't tell adults, they won't believe you.
Yeah.
And so they had this big episode in the 80s where all of a sudden all the adults finally meet Snuffleupagus, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Big Bird, we didn't believe you, and we'll believe you from now on when you tell us things. And like a lot of kids didn't know it was a big episode or what the big reason for, but without being a big episode, it was a big episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a really smart thing for them to recognize, because it was in the 80s that there was a greater realization of the darkness that happens behind closed doors and what can happen to kids, even to their own biological parents and their own
Mhm.
flesh and blood, what they can do. And it's terrible stuff. Shouldn't happen to anyone, but it does happen. And it is a good way for them to recognize, no, we don't want a kid to feel like, well, Big Bird was honest and an adult didn't listen to him. Why would an adult listen to me? Because they're going to have that disconnect, or they're not going to have that disconnect that we have. They're going to see it that way. And so good on them for addressing that right away, or when they realize it. I don't know how quick right away, but
yeah. And that's why, I mean, Big Bird, like I said, you notice these big moments, Big Bird is at the center of it. So I have I wrote down, I'm counting up 9. Like when you think of like the core Sesame Street, the main, like the characters that make it who it is. So I want to see how many, how much overlap we have. So what characters do you think of when you think of Sesame Street as a whole? I have it down to a top 9.
I'm going to hit on one that we haven't talked about yet, but I'll tell you the other ones, and so we can talk about this one for a little bit. But I remember really enjoying and being a little puzzled at the character of Oscar the Grouch.
Yep, Oscar's on there for sure.
Like, such an odd character for such a fan, and it's such a sweet show too. It's like everyone gets along, everyone's friends, they all enjoy each other, and then there's just this guy who's like, I don't like people. It's like, what are you even doing here?
I think it might be a mix of, they mentioned in the show, like, we want to tell people that sometimes people are grumpy or having a bad day, but I think also they were just having fun with that character. That's a character that can say things, like Oscar can say things that like Bert and Ernie can't.
Yeah, he says what we're all thinking.
In fact, the one time it really pushed the line, I think I may have told you about this. There was a special in 1979 called Christmas Eve on Sesame Street. And it starts with all the Muppets and the characters, they're all ice skating. And then they're at the subway, the New York subway. And Big Bird's talking about how Santa Claus can get down the chimney. And Oscar's telling him, you think Santa can get down the chimney? You are the stupidest. And it goes on where he starts listing all, like, insulting Big Bird. And they do the gag where the train rolls by and you can't hear what Oscar's saying as he's like basically implying that he's swearing at Big Bird while Big Bird's mouth is opening up in shock. And then the train goes by, Bird I've ever seen in my life. It's like, that sounds like I'm describing a Family Guy spoof of Sesame Street, but no, that was Sesame Street itself.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And poor Big Bird, because Big Bird has the intelligence of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old.
Yeah, he's supposed to be like 4, 5, 6 in that range, like mentality.
Which obviously Big Bird is one of those keys. We've already said one of those key core elements. We've also talked about Bert and Ernie, so we got those 4 up to there. One we haven't talked too much about is the Count.
Yep, I love the Count.
I did too.
Just easily just number. And it's the gag, like, oh yeah, the Count. He counts numbers. It's the joke is right there, and yeah,
it is such an obvious pun, but it's like, who's the puppeteer who came up with him?
That was Jerry Nelson.
That's right, Jerry Nelson, and Jerry Nelson, who of Muppets fame too, and so him coming up with just such an obvious, great thing, like, a count who counts. Yeah, makes sense, and it works. It's fun.
Yeah. And the Count is so out of it, like so out of the drama sometimes. Like Muppet Family Christmas was the big Muppets, Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock all together. And there's a big sad moment where like it's a blizzard and Miss Piggy hasn't arrived yet. So Kermit's looking out the window like, man, I'm just worried. He's like, it's played as like a serious moment. And then the Count's like, one worried frog. And then Robin's like, he's not the only one. And he goes over to Kermit. By Kermit, he's looking out the window. And instead of showing any emotion, he's like, two worried frogs.
I would often mistake him for, if you ever watched the shows Eureka's Castle.
Oh, yeah.
There was a bat character, like vampire character on that too, but his thing was he'd fly into walls. And I'd always love that too. Hilarious.
I can see that. I wouldn't be surprised if that bat was maybe inspired by the Count.
And he might have borrowed from another one of the mainstays, Grover, also Super Grover, who would frequently fly and crash as he's flying. So I don't know which came first.
Grover filled the Elmo role before Elmo, and I think he did it better. Because he could get to the point where he's like exasperated and like there's the thing they showed of like the little cowboy doors showing the words over, under, and through. So you go like over the doors, under, and through. And he would keep doing that until he like, I can't breathe. And he'd like fall over in exhaustion. Like that's the kind of stuff that you could, and that kind of joke doesn't really work with Elmo, but you could push Grover to the limit.
Yes, because Elmo also has that mental capacity of like a 4 or 5-year-old, whereas Grover, he is an adult character, but he also is plenty silly.
Grover is Kirk from Gilmore Girls.
Don't you do that to me. Don't ruin Grover for me. I had the book, There's a Monster at the End of This Book, and I read
I had that too.
Every night as a kid.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, that stars Grover. It's a fun little cute book where it's like there's a monster at the end of this book, and then Grover is like aware it's a very fourth wall breaking book, and so he keeps trying to stop you from turning the page because every page turn gets you closer to the monster at the end of the book.
Yeah, and then the monster is him, right?
It is.
Yeah,
and he's like, "Oh, look, it's me!" Haha, fun. Another.
Then, obviously, you have to bring up Elmo. Like you said, Elmo is love him or hate him, and I think if he was used correctly in the way he was in like the mid to late 80s, that's peak Elmo time where he didn't take over.
Yeah,
what were you gonna say? Yeah,
that's 7. And so 8 is one that we haven't talked about much either, but was also just a fun goofball, is a Cookie Monster.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
One of those characters, he's just a shtick, but you love him.
Mm-hmm. There's a whole thing. There's another special, and this is, and again, I didn't do all this research for all these specials. I just have these in my mind. It's in the early 90s. It was a Big Bird's birthday, and one of the things is like everybody goes and out ice skating and the whole thing, and they're there, and Cookie Monster is left alone, and he ends up like to avoid eating the birthday cake, which he knows he's not supposed to do. He eats everything else on Sesame Street. He eats like the sign and the tables, and like he is like another one of those can be just for a gag. Like, and forget about like people say, oh, he's giving a bad influence by always eating cookies. He's also eating things that aren't food. I think we can just calm down on being outraged by Cookie Monster.
Yeah. Would you say that the 9th one would, because if you have Kermit on there, I consider him a Muppet versus.
I do have Kermit because for about 20 years or so, he was also frequently on Sesame Street. He wasn't just a pop on. He would do his news reporter Kermit. He would basically being a news reporter and like retelling like fairy tales. He was the reporter who was reporting on the putting together of Humpty Dumpty or of Rapunzel. And he was one of the gang until, I'm not sure if it was like the 90s or the early 2000s where they had to stop. I mean, and now he can't be on Sesame Street because he's part of the owned Disney characters. And they had to actually get special permission to use the character for a scene in the 50th anniversary special. But I did include Kermit for that.
Okay.
But fair. Also the last one I had was, we already talked about, was Snuffleupagus.
Yeah. I thought I counted 9, but I missed it then.
Wait, did I? Big Bird, Elmo, Ernie, Bert, Grover, Oscar, Snuffy, count Kermit. Maybe you're counting Ernie and Bert as one, where I counted them separate.
I thought I counted them separate.
Oh,
maybe I can't. Maybe I counted them. Maybe, who knows?
And just personally, I know personally, even though I would put them kind of in the second tier characters, but I love Telly Monster.
Telly Monster.
Yeah, and another thing is interesting, just the longevity. So. A name you don't hear much is Marty Robinson, who he's the performer. He's Snuffleupagus and he is Telly, and he joined in like the early 80s. And like in the early 80s, he was the new kid, learning from Jim Henson and Frank Oz and Carol Spinney. And now he is the longest lasting performer. He's the one all the current performers are learning from. It's like come full circle.
Nice. All right. Well, you have on here, you want to talk a little bit about the songs from Sesame Street. And then after that, I want to talk about the widespread cultural impact and the actual crux of the episode, why this has influenced us or what has influenced us.
Yeah. You can't deny that Sesame Street has some songs that get some earworm songs that get stuck in your head. Like some characters have anthems. I mean, there's the ABC song, the Abkadefki Jekyll says from Big Bird, Rubber Ducky, C is for Cookie, Elmo's song, I Love Trash, and another one that is my personal favorite is I Don't Want to Live on the Moon. It's just it's like perfect little like lullaby song for Ernie singing about, and it's just I love these songs from Sesame Street, or Monster in the Mirror from Grover. I mean, I could go on with like all of these songs from Sesame Street.
Michael Jackson wrote that one, actually.
Oh yeah.
I'm starting with a monster in the mirror.
For a second there, I thought you were serious. I could see some like I could see like a performance artist actually writing a song for Sesame Street, but I'm like, no, that's not it.
I'm glad we had to clarify in our news position sort of episode here. I should clarify when I'm just full of crap, and that was one of the times.
Yeah. Well, you got me for a second there because I completely forgot about that Michael Jackson song.
How could you? That's one of his best.
Yeah. Well, like in the Sesame Street 50th anniversary special, they did a whole segment about these famous songs. And so, did you have a favorite Sesame Street song growing up, or were you not as into it?
There's not one that would be like, oh, I go back to it, but it's like if there's anything that was going to get stuck in my head, it's probably that little opening ditty of the "Can you tell me how to get," just the opening theme song.
Yeah, I mean it's a good one. I mean it's definitely a good classic theme song for sure.
Yeah,
but yeah, no. If you ever look up, I to this day I can recite every word to the song of "I Don't Want to Live on the Moon," and I always will, because I had a cassette tape growing up, and it was Kermit and Ernie, and it was like on the one side was all Ernie songs, and the other side was all Kermit songs, like "Being Green." Put Down the Ducky, which they showed in the special, which is just a little. I'm not sure what they were trying to teach, but it was like literally you can't play the saxophone if you're also holding a rubber ducky. That was the whole point of the song. But it's so catchy. With Hoots the Owl, also played by Kevin Clash, teaching Ernie that, and of course, as soon as he drops the rubber ducky, he can like play the saxophone at like an expert level.
That's true. That's all that's stopping you guys out there. If you want to become a professional saxophonist, put down the rubber ducky.
Put down the ducky. You got to leave the duck alone.
You gotta. Well,
yeah. Go ahead with the cultural impact. Yeah.
We talked about cultural impact, and we've talked about how like kids programming specifically and what we grew up on. We would not have Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and Disney Channel original animated shows. I don't believe we would have those sorts of shows that we like blew up in the 90s without Sesame Street. Because Sesame Street was able to compete with adult programming, and Nickelodeon was the first channel for cable that was able to also compete and put up big numbers and show that there is a market for kids programming. And so Nickelodeon was very influential, but they stood on the shoulders of shows like Sesame Street that put up also giant numbers as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like it's so funny when you see the beginning of it. They're talking like, well, we may fail and no one may watch it, and knowing like we're making this 5 decades later, like multiple generations have grown up on this thing, and just they never knew it was going to last.
Yeah,
and it's become such a cultural juggernaut.
And just because we've had bad like shows of like following this, you know, like the formula of Dora the Explorer, and you guys might not like that I called it bad, but it is not for adults in any sort of way. No. Dora the Explorer is 1,000% for kids, but Dora, like Bob the Builder, Bubble Guppies, all these shows where and I liked Blue's Clues, but Blue's Clues is that same sort of like there's this newer version of kids programming from the 80s on where it's, hey, let me present something, kids shout out the answer, and then we'll proceed with the episode. And that is annoying.
I agree that it works with Blue's Clues, and I don't know why it works with Blue's Clues. Like I don't know why I'm not annoyed with it with Blue's Clues.
Yeah.
What sets it apart? Was it just Steve himself?
Yeah, because Steve that show is more influenced to me by Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood than it is by Sesame Street. But there's still that little bit of like, Steve's your friend, and we're his friend, and we are solving this mystery together. And the mystery is better than the mysteries that Dora explores, in my opinion.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I think Dora was a little bit after our time. I think if we were maybe like 10 years younger, we would have been prime in the Dora generation. But maybe. I still saw enough of it to. But yeah, I was never a big Dora. I don't know. I agree that it definitely Sesame Street paved the way for all of these. And not to say that if Sesame Street didn't come along, something else could have come along that could have influenced it. But I think the whole like landscape of children's television would be completely different without Sesame Street.
So here's the other thing that I think was a big influence too, is that I don't think the Muppets would be what it was without Sesame Street, because I know the Muppet Show was in the 70s,
Yeah.
but there was what was the one that came before that they worked on, the show for the Muppets?
You mean before Sesame Street?
Yeah,
You mean Sam and Friends?
that's it. I thought it was Sam and Friends, but I didn't want to say it and sound stupid, and I
No,
just
you're
knew
right.
that you would know it for sure.
Yeah, well, Sam and Friends was just like local after the news, and it would these puppets. That was the earliest version of Kermit was on there. They would just like be lip syncing to old records and sometimes doing little sketches, and it was like kind of like Jim Henson, and at that point it's him and his future wife Jane just kind of figuring things out. Like they were getting their legs for what they could do with a puppet show.
Yeah. But so yeah, after they did that, then they had Sesame Street, and it took about a couple of years, like 4 or 5 years or so, because I think Muppets was mid 70s, 75, 76. So
Yep. Well, they had a pilot in 74 and a pilot in 75, and then they officially started in 76. So the Muppet Show was 76 to 81.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And then Saturday Night Live, which we've talked about, which also had Jim Henson in that first season or first 2 seasons, one of those, that was early 70s. So that was a couple years after this as well. And so it was Jim just really growing his company, but Sesame Street was the launching platform that went from the Sam and Friends small stuff into Kermit's going to be a little bit more of a household name, and then developing some of the other characters, because Miss Piggy was Muppets only and not Sesame Street, right?
Yeah.
Same
Yep.
with Fozzie and
I mean,
Gonzo.
yep. An interesting thing, like Miss Piggy was kind of a mistake. She in the first season she was not intended to be a big character, but the character just took off in popularity. So by the second season, she was like, "All right, it's Kermit and Miss Piggy in the gang now."
Yeah. So the Muppets, like it or not, the Muppets have also been so influential. I mean, how many people will say my favorite Christmas movie is Muppets Christmas Carol, or they cite the Muppet movie from the 70s or whenever that was.
79, yeah.
79. Or like the impact that it had even to this day. Like, as of this recording, we are about a month away from the last airing of the Muppet Vision 3D in Disney's MG or Hollywood Studios, and that's going to get shut down. But it's like there still was this huge response, because there's this loyal group of Muppet fans, people who love it, and the impact that show had for 30 years or 40 years at that park.
Well, if you're listening to this in 2025, it's still going on. They're doing a celebration of the 70th anniversary of the Muppets, and so they're doing 70 weeks of Muppets. So every week a different Muppet is featured, and they're going deep cut. I mean, they haven't hit some of the main ones. My guess is they're saving Kermit for last.
Who is they?
Disney. Actually, Disney is promoting it, a different Muppet every week. They have this graphic. If you follow the Muppets Facebook page, and of course I'm saving the pictures and I have a document that I'm building because of it. But every week is a new character. They've gotten up to 31 characters so far, 31 weeks. And they've gotten some really obscure characters. And I'm like, man, if they're doing that character, they probably have this one, this one, this one. But it's interesting because me and my girlfriend, every week we try to guess who we think is going to be coming up next.
Yeah. And I know you could talk a lot more about this, but for the sake of our guests, we won't. But I mean, this doesn't even bring into a conversation Dark Crystal or Labyrinth or Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
A lot of these other Jim Henson properties that came because of the success of Sesame Street, followed by the success of Muppets.
Yeah, Sesame Street. I mean, Jim Henson was already a big name before Sesame Street. That's why they brought him in. But Sesame Street definitely catapulted his career, and just they said the merchandising rights and the publicity you got from Sesame Street is basically what gave them the funds to keep going. Like, there definitely would not have been a Muppet Show, I don't think, without the money Jim Henson got from Sesame Street.
Yeah, and the Muppet Show itself is influential of just this sketch comedy programming, but for kids, and ridiculous. And like we've talked before when we talk about Muppets, that it's not for kids in the way that Sesame Street's for kids, but it is very kid friendly for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Jim Henson ended the Muppet Show on his own terms. They didn't get canceled. could have been potentially a world where the Muppet Show went on much, much longer, but he wanted to do other things.
Yeah. And so, like, even to this day, like, anytime you talk about kids programming, that you have to talk about the longest run. It's not the longest running show, because I think that's General Hospital. It's some soap opera that's been about 60 seasons.
Yeah, and then if you go, or if you go into like 60 Minutes or stuff like that, it technically could be longer.
Yeah, I believe that Sesame Street, even including those, is technically the longest running current show. The number one is what I think, General Hospital, or what, something like, not General Hospital. It's one of those type of shows.
Well, and Sesame Street's future is a little bit uncertain right now, because I was going to bring this up at the end, but I'll bring it up now. So it's a few years ago, they partnered with HBO, and I mean, and now HBO Max for the distribution and like the funding of it, because it got to be too expensive to just be at PBS. So like the official home of Sesame Street was HBO, and then PBS would air the shows one season behind. And that they've decided to stop that. But HBO has, because of it just isn't worth the money anymore. So HBO will be the streaming home of Sesame Street through 2027. And right now they're still looking at different options for distribution. And so it's like, it's not officially over, but there is a non-zero chance that it could be the end of Sesame Street within the next couple of years, which would be a sad thought. And I hope they find a new home.
Yeah. And so today, like, that, even if Sesame Street dies, there still is what we've seen of edutainment. We've seen this major blow up in the last 55 years, and how common edutainment is. We have things like Duolingo on our phones, which I would argue is edutainment, because there's some fun parts of that. Like things like Wordle and other like apps on your phone that stir the brain. Those are versions of it. We have documentaries that we love, and sometimes they're really well done documentaries that are a lot of fun, and sometimes they can maybe be a little bit more boring, like you'd watch in TV, or you'd watch in school. But you and I grew up on shows like Bill Nye the Science Guy, and the less popular but still somehow beloved Beaker's World. Some people huge fans of that. But there are all these different avenues of edutainment that still exist to this day. I wouldn't say Bluey specifically is edutainment, but there's still a feel of like that Mr. Rogers type era, where it's like, this is a family. This is like, you're invited to feel like you're part of this family, and you're learning with these characters in Bluey, and you enjoy. There's something so relatable about that family dynamic, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I agree completely. And you learn through. I mean, you can learn through anything. Anything can be edutainment, even if it's not intending to teach you something. You can learn from anything. People could learn something from our podcast, even though we're just. I don't know. I don't even call it entertainment. I don't even know what you call us. I don't know what category are we in. I don't want to insult us.
I'd say we're entertainment, but I think episodes like this can be edutainment. I watch a lot of video essays on YouTube. I love video essays about topics that I really appreciate. And so that is edutainment. Game theory, speaking of which, on YouTube, those sorts of ones, that's a lot of edutainment. Sometimes it's a little bit more entertainment because they're talking about the lore of different shows or whatever, and that's really not educating anyone. But there's other times they go into science of things and the philosophy and psychology of other items. And then even just how we interact with it too. There's a lot of video games that are. I already talked about the apps that we have, but there are video games that can be edutainment, and just our culture, how it leans a lot more to user created content, like you and I, or like these. Anyone can be an edutainer. Anyone can take things that they know and their perspective and things that they've learned, and they can put it out there. And it's not the same as, here's your ABCs, here's what 1 + 1 equals, but it is saying, this is something I know about, and let me entertain you while I'm telling you about something, and making you just a little bit smarter, and walking away with a little bit more knowledge than you had at the beginning of this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's finding those creative ways to do it, because then, and also with the whole point of Sesame Street back to the very beginning was keeping the kids entertained and interested enough to learn something. Whereas like, you just have the teacher at the front of the board, 2 + 2 is 4. Then you're thinking about, you start zoning out.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, so Matt, I was a big Sesame Street kid growing up, and for me, Sesame Street, in addition to just being a huge nerd about it and loving the songs and all that, it almost seemed like some of these characters, like seeing Grover or the Two-Headed Monster or Bert and Ernie, like kind of almost like gave me license to, like, you know what? I can be weird, I can be goofy and creative and kind of be myself. It's almost like Sesame Street gave me that permission when I was little to go outside of what was normal necessarily and just really find my own personality. I kind of give Sesame Street a little bit of credit for that. How much, like, were you a Sesame Street kid growing up?
I was, but I know that I liked it more before I could remember it. And so I think, when I look back on Sesame Street, and especially because I know that characters like Grover are the ones that I would resonate a little bit more with, and Bert and Ernie. And there's some silliness with those guys. And so being able to see these characters be silly and then accepted by the adults around them, I'm sure that tied into who I am now. I mean, you get everyone who knows me knows that I've got a degree of silliness. It's not much. It's just a little bit. But no, I've got.
Keep telling yourself that, yeah.
I've got some silliness within me. No, but
I think if you and I work well as pairs for this podcast because we both have a healthy amount of not taking ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. Yep. And you're Bert and I'm Ernie, and it's great.
Am I the Bert of the two of us, or is it kind of rotating?
You are if Bert was a little bit more cheery, because he's a little bit more sullen. But if we lived together, you would be like the Matt. Why are you messing up my house every second of the day?
Okay, I will give you fair point. I did get a new vacuum, and I named her Vicky the Vacuum. So that's okay. There are aspects of me that are definitely Bert.
Yes. Yep. But no, he is more stuck up than you are by far.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so that's what it means to me. It's always going to have that special place in my heart, even if I don't remember it as well as I remember some things that I saw when I was like. What I remember influencing me more are like Disney movies. The first movie I saw in theaters was Aladdin, and Lion King made me cry every single time I saw it until I realized, like, oh, it's just an animated lion. It's fine. And then Beauty and the Beast that was a little bit later for me that I appreciated it. But like all these Disney films, like I really enjoyed and I loved, and that was where my creative storytelling grew, is watching those. Yeah. But
Toy Story. Right. I was a huge Toy Story kid.
And we were only 7 when that came out. 95.
Yeah.
Gosh, it feels like it was like much later, but nope.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you had here something about 50th anniversary special. I thought we had like hit good points to wrap it up, but I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to share anything about 50th anniversary before we wrap it up.
Actually, I think maybe we might be able to skip that part because I was going to bring it up, and sorry if I made you watch it. We're not going to talk about it, but I thought that I just kind of liked how like there's so many little nuggets and back like so many different characters and inside jokes from the past. Like at the very beginning, this is a little tidbit. Carol Spinney says, it's Carol Spinney's voice at the very beginning when Joseph Gordon-Levitt gets in the cab and you hear the voice saying, "Where to, Mac?" That's Carol Spinney, because he based Oscar the Grouch's voice on a cab driver he had that said that. And hey, look, that's because I've heard that story before. And little things like that, like you see Roosevelt Franklin and Captain Vegetable and, Lefty the Salesman and all these characters that you probably are like, who is that? I'm like, oh, look, it's that guy. It's all these forgotten little characters, like Forgetful Jones and Sherlock Hemlock, and I'm probably just naming nonsense names to you, but these are all characters that had cameos in the 50th anniversary special.
You could 100% slip in fake names, and I wouldn't know. I wouldn't call you on it.
Yep. I'm still
Dr. Giblets. Oh yeah, good old Dr. Giblets.
I'm still unsure. So there's a character, Captain Vegetable, who just had a song, Captain Vegetable, basically just teaching kids to eat vegetables. And I'm not sure if they recast him for this part or if they're just using old Jim Henson audio. It could be either way, but if they recast him, they got a very good sound-alike for Captain Vegetable.
Not to be confused with the kitchen cabaret of Epcot, Veggie Frou Frou.
And that was your turn. You could make something up about Disney, and I would have no idea if you were lying or not.
That's a deep cut for y'all. I don't even know if I was there for that because it turned into Kitchen Rocks after it was Food Rocks. I'm sorry, after it was Kitchen Cabaret, and I can't remember which one Veggie Frou Frou was from, but not that it matters. But I did look it up, and Veggie Frou Frou is from Kitchen Cabaret. I thought it was.
Good, you got it right.
I did. I did get
honestly,
it right.
I didn't doubt you. Your Disney knowledge is like my Muppet knowledge. You can say anything, and I'm like, it's probably true, and I'll tell people, and then you could get away with telling me something that's not true, and I'll tell people, oh yeah, this is true about Disney World, and Matt said it.
You're telling everyone, they're like, no, that's wrong. You're like, you moron, you lied to me.
But I would have to find someone else who knew enough to know that you were lying.
That's true. Well, speaking of knowing things, this is a good episode, but let's move into trivia. Because we have some trivia to talk about, and then we'll close it up.
Talking about people we grew up watching, we said that in Star Wars Skeleton Crew.
Don't say it so creepily. People we grew up watching that have restraining orders against us now.
On the TV, not in person. As far as at least me, I can't speak for Matt.
Yeah, they never found me.
Star Wars Skeleton Crew had a 90s TV icon, which is Jaleel White.
Did I do that?
Yep, known most popularly as Steve Urkel. Was what was his character's name? Gunter it started with a G.
That sounds right. Let's say
he was one of the bad guys. He was the dog-faced. I hope like no one like Jeff, who's super in Star Wars, is watching me butcher this. But the dog-faced guy, second in command, was played by Jaleel White.
Yes, and you're right. It was Gunter. Unless it's pronounced Gunter. I don't remember them ever actually saying his name.
And for this week's trivia, we talked briefly about the 50th anniversary special. And at the end of that special, in the crowd, there are two retired Sesame Street performers who are in that group you can see. So the question is, who are the two performers you can see in the crowd at the end of Sesame Street's 50th anniversary special?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Yep, he's a retired performer.
Whoopi Goldberg.
Who was there for some reason. I don't know.
Hi, I'm Whoopi. Great. Go away.
I like Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the host of that.
Yeah.
And I liked at the end, they had like all the different celebrities saying, happy 50th Sesame Street. But like, Whoopi Goldberg has nothing to do with Sesame Street, really. So why was she there? I don't know.
I liked Sterling K. Brown's part.
I did too. He did great. And that, wasn't that right in the middle of This Is Us being popular? Like he was a big name at the time.
It could have.
I mean, not that he's not now, but I think it was 2019.
I mean, he got an Oscar nomination a year ago, so I mean, he's still a big enough name.
Yes, that's true. I shouldn't say he's over now.
I know he just had that big hit show Paradise, but he's a fool.
Yeah.
All right, well that's it. That's all we've got for this week. Next week we're gonna go over the pond. We're gonna go to the UK to talk about The Office, innit? And
the original Office.
The original Office.
And I have not seen it, and I am curious and nervous to find out if I like it or hate it.
I've seen the pilot episode, which they kept very similar to the US's pilot office episode. Yeah, whatever version of those words made sense. You know what I mean.
Well, I know the UK Office is very revered and loved by everyone who made the version of The Office that we love, so that should say something.
Yeah, it should. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll suck. I don't know. But we'll talk to you about it next time we listen. And then if you're like, I'm on the fence about it, let me listen to them first. Go ahead. Do that. Or you can listen to it yourself and you can join us and you can be like, yeah, you're right. That was great or awful. Whichever one.
Yep.
But until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.